Okay, here's a thought. What if I told you that one of the most ancient European genetic signatures has survived for over 4,000 years, barely changed, in a country you might not expect?
Hmm. That sounds like something out of a historical epic, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yet, that's exactly what researchers are saying about Latvia's genetic makeup. It's often described as a kind of time capsule of prehistoric European ancestry.
A time capsule. Yeah, I like that. So this deep dive, it's all about the Latvian genome. And it's a story wrapped in, well, incredible resilience, isn't it? Surviving everything from Viking raids to Soviet occupation. It's a pretty intriguing genetic journey.
And what's really fascinating, I think, is that beyond just the history, Latvia's genome has become a bit of a flashpoint for identity, for diversity, and sometimes even for discrimination. It makes it one of Europe's most unique and maybe sometimes controversial genetic stories.
Right. So for you listening, our mission today is really to unpack what makes this genetic story so unique. What does it tell us about ancient populations, about modern identity, and believe it or not, maybe even hints about personality. Let's get into the DNA.
Okay, so to start, scientists from places like the Estonian Biocenter and the European DNA Atlas Project, they've uncovered something pretty remarkable.
Hmm.
They found that over 40% of Latvians belong to a specific Y-DNA haplogroup, N1C1. Now, for anyone unfamiliar, Y-DNA, that's a unique genetic marker passed just from father to son.
Right, the male line.
Exactly. It reveals a direct male lineage tracing back thousands of years. And this marker, N1C1 researchers tell us, can be traced back to ancient Uralic peoples who migrated to the Baltics maybe over 5,000 years ago.
Wow, 40%. That sounds like a huge number, especially compared to, say, Germany or France or the UK, where you'd maybe expect much more genetic blending over time.
It is unusually high, yes.
So beyond that Y-DNA, are there other genetic markers that kind of back this up, this pattern of continuity? Or does the story get a bit more complex if we look at maybe mitochondrial DNA?
That's a really good question. And yes, if we connect this to the bigger picture, mitochondrial DNA studies, which trace ancestry just through the mother's line, they also show strong continuity.
Mm.
Continuity with Mesolithic hunter-gatherers.
Ah, the really early Stone Age folk.
Those were the populations roaming Europe long before farming really took hold. So what you end up with is this picture of a gene pool that stayed surprisingly stable, even with centuries of conquest and migration happening, all around them.
It does make you wonder, though, why? Why did Latvia's genome stay so intact when so much of Europe was constantly shifting, mixing?
Well, historians often point to Latvia's geography. Its sort of relative isolation played a pretty big role. You have
Mm.
dense forests and historically lower rates of external migration compared to other parts of Europe. And all that helped preserve its genetic identity. This has led some scientists to describe Latvians as one of the least admixed groups in Europe, genetically speaking.
Meaning less mixing.
Exactly. Their gene pool has seen remarkably little input from outside populations over these long stretches of time. It's almost like the terrain itself created a kind of natural genetic sanctuary.
A sanctuary. But this genetic continuity, it's not purely academic, is it? It touches on some really sensitive modern issues. This unique genetic story has apparently led to some pretty hot-button discussions. Let's maybe delve into that. What makes this story more than just science?
Yeah, and this raises a really important point about how we interpret genetic data in the first place.
Mm.
One controversy revolves around what some people have unfortunately called the pure Baltic myth.
Right, you hear that sometimes in certain circles, this push to frame Latvians as, quote, one of the purest European races. And sadly, this idea, it's been misused by, well, ultranationalists and even white supremacist groups.
Which is deeply problematic.
Yeah, and it's really critical to state that researchers and historians strongly, strongly oppose this misuse of genetic information.
Absolutely. And here's the key scientific insight. While scientists do clarify that Latvians are genetically less mixed, particularly in recent centuries compared to many other Europeans, the whole idea of genetic purity is frankly a myth. It's scientifically baseless.
Because everyone's DNA is a mix, right?
Everyone's DNA is a mosaic. And actually, the presence of Eastern Eurasian DNA segments in Latvians may be up to 4–6% in some rural populations that acts like a genetic handshake across vast ancient migrations. It's a powerful counterpoint to any notion of pure ancestry. It really shows deep historical interconnectedness.
That complexity is important.
Yeah.
And there's another powerful controversy, too, tied to the Soviet legacy, isn't there?
Yes, absolutely. During the Soviet occupation, genetic studies in Latvia were actually suppressed or politically manipulated. Ideas of ethnic blending were often promoted for ideological reasons, to fit the Soviet narrative, while local Baltic identity was deliberately downplayed or minimized.
It's a stark reminder, isn't it, how science can be twisted for political agendas.
It really is. It was only after independence in 1991 that Latvia's researchers really regained control. And since then, they've been building one of Eastern Europe's most detailed biobanks. Latvia's Genome Center today is gathering thousands of DNA samples, trying to understand things like disease susceptibility and national heritage, but crucially, operating free from those external political agendas. It's a massive step forward.
Definitely. Okay, and there's one final, maybe unexpected thread in this genetic tapestry you mentioned, connects Latvians to a distant ancient relative, people up in the Nordic regions.
That's right. It's fascinating. This connection points to a once incredibly widespread prehistoric population that probably stretched from Siberia all the way across to the Baltics long, long before modern borders ever existed. You have to imagine those ancient journeys, right? Stretching across these vast, often unforgiving landscapes. The echoes of those movements are literally written into Latvian DNA. So while Latvia speaks a Baltic language today, the genetic trail links back to something much older, maybe something colder, and certainly far more complex than any modern map suggests. It's a really deep historical connection that goes beyond language families.
That geographical reach is just incredible to think about, which actually makes me wonder, does Latvian DNA say anything about, well, personality? I mean, could those harsh Baltic winters, the silent pine forests, centuries of hardship, could that have subtly influenced not just physical traits, but maybe aspects of their collective temperament? Resilience, perhaps?
That's a really intriguing line of inquiry, though we have to approach it with a lot of caution.
Of course.
Some researchers have suggested that gene-environment interaction could play a role in why Latvians are sometimes described, stereotypically perhaps, as quiet or introspective, emotionally reserved, especially compared to, say, Southern Europeans. There are studies showing population-level differences in gene variants involved in, like dopamine and serotonin pathways.
The mood regulators.
Exactly, things that regulate emotional processing. But, and this is a big but.
Yeah, this idea of gene-environment interaction is fascinating, but can you maybe elaborate on the limits here? What can't we infer about personality from genetics? How does culture play into this? It's not a simple, this gene equals that personality trait kind of thing, is it?
No, absolutely not. That distinction is crucial. These genetic variants, they don't determine personality. At most, they might subtly influence how populations, on average, respond to things like stress or risk or trauma, and possibly through epigenetic patterns passed down generations.
Those subtle changes in how genes are expressed.
Right, the on-off switches, often influenced by the environment, not changes to the DNA code itself. So the hypothesis goes, in a place like Latvia, where survival for centuries might have depended on caution, resilience, adaptability, maybe those traits became cultural norms and were perhaps subtly reinforced over time through such mechanisms. It's a hypothesis about how environment and genetics can subtly intertwine. It's a world away from genetic destiny.
Right, a complex interplay, not destiny. Okay, so wrapping this up then, we've gone through quite a journey here with Latvia's genes. Why is this story ultimately so special? What's the main takeaway?
Well, I think because it tells such a powerful story of ancient continuity. Right here on a continent that's seen constant change, it speaks of these incredibly deep roots in Eurasia's sort of forgotten migrations, revealing layers of human history we're only just starting to properly uncover.
Yeah, and it also tells a story of, well, the scars of occupation and the ongoing fight to reclaim a genetic identity, one that was once suppressed and manipulated for political reasons.
Exactly. And I think ultimately it highlights this quiet resilience, the resilience of a people who, you could say, truly carry history in their blood. Latvia might look small on a map, but its genetic legacy feels immense.
Immense is a good word for it. So as you listening reflect on this incredible journey through Latvia's genetic past, what did you find most surprising? When you think about that. And perhaps a bigger question, do you think national identity and ancient DNA should influence how countries see themselves or how they see each other? Definitely something to ponder.